So you like vampires? Hello fellow book nerds, this is Gabby and today I have another video in my series where I recommend you books based on our favorite tropes, creatures, and all things bookish. So today's video is all about vampires because I've been saying for a while that vampires are back, baby. My teenagehood was dominated by vampires. Twilight was the one. I have also tried to read like Vampire Diaries, Vampire Academy. Anything that had vampire in the title, I was pretty much game for, but Twilight was like my catnip, it was my kryptonite, it was my everything. And I'm currently, funnily enough, doing a reread of Twilight just to see what it's like in English. I'm really curious. I'm scared. But actually what inspired this video is the fact that I've said I think that books with vampires are just coming back. Vampires are coming back to our collective consciousness. You probably know trends, they recycle. Usually they take about 10 years to come back, and you can definitely see that. I think dragons are coming back now, vampires are coming back, and again, 10 years ago when I was about 16, 13, whatever, that's when vampires were big. Just a quick cutaway, I feel like when you were originally supposed to see this video was a week or two different from when you are seeing it because scheduling and pre-filming and struggles. So I wanted to mention that this video is to celebrate the release of Education and Malice. Education Malice is actually coming out next week, not this week. I have a review coming out. I've already read it at this point, but there's another vampire book coming out just the week after, which is A Tempest of Tea. So those two vampire books are coming back to back, so I thought let me bring you this video now, and you can follow my channel and subscribe to follow along on the journey of us finding out if those vampire books are good while we're awaiting for the release, or maybe you're even reading it already, but you know, if you need something to quench your thirst afterwards, here are some books that I've read, really liked, thought I had an interesting take on vampires, and I think you should pick up as well if you like the trope. I couldn't not mention my favorite book of 2023, which is Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas. So like I said, this book made it onto my favorite books of the year list, and I have been screaming from the rooftops about it, so I'm not gonna bore you. But this book is set in 1800s Mexico, and we follow a rich daughter of a ranchero and a poor son of a vaquero who fall in love as children, but a mysterious creature attacks Nena, the rich daughter, and Nestor, the poor son, believes that she died and escapes, but she didn't die. She just was really gravely wounded because something bit her in the neck, leaving 2 scar marks that looked like bites. Probably no secret, there are vampires in this one, Vampires of El Norte, but I absolutely adored this book. I think it's such an amazing gothic romance novel. There are vampires in it, they're not the main players, so if you're like, I want vampires to be front and center and this is their time to shine, maybe not for you. But if you like your vampires are these bloodthirsty animalistic creatures, that's kind of the take of this book on the vampires, less so than the human dark and handsome stereotype, more on the bloodthirsty monster side, and it still has an amazing romance even if it's not between a vampire and a human, and I would 100% recommend this book. I love it to death. I just think it's such an amazing book, and I will keep recommending it because I adore it. Then I wanted to follow up the theme with another horror about vampires, and a horror inspired by Mexican/Aztec mythology, so maybe you know where I'm getting at this with. So it's called Certain Dark Things, and it's debut of Silvia Moreno-Garcia, which is one of my favorite authors, and she's the author of Mexican Gothic, which I actually do have. She also wrote Signal to Noise, which I have not read yet. But this book is the author's debut, and it takes us to this like futuristic sci-fi world where there are many different casts of vampires, and each type of vampire has their own unique quirks. So if you think about all the different of the scope of the myths about vampires. These vampires, each category kind of takes different things from those myths, and I thought that was such a cool and unique aspect to this. Our main character is from a line of vampires that are nearly extinct, and she has to run for her life, and while she's running for her life, she also picks up this like human companion at Renford, if you will. So this book was absolutely amazing when it comes to the lore. I just thought it was so rich, it was so unique, so creative, definitely took from many different cultures, and I really loved that. And I loved seeing how the different types of vampires interacted, how their lives differed, and all of that. That was really, really cool. Overall, I really enjoyed it. It's a very quick paced adventure almost story, because you feel like you're kind of running from something. It's very dramatic that way, and I really enjoyed it. And again, if you're really into vampires, the lore is just like uncomparable, because it's just so deep and detailed and interesting and just unique. Then I would be remiss if I didn't recommend you a classic. So I actually never read Dracula, but I have read Carmilla by J. Sheridan Le Fon. So Carmilla is even older than Dracula. I think it first came out in like 1800s, and in this one we follow a girl who I think lives quite an isolated life, and one day a carriage breaks down and a woman called Carmilla kind of gets stranded, and this girl invites her to her house and maybe slightly get seduced, or at least that's the goal. So Carmilla is sapphic, and I think just for its time period, it's absolutely insane how influential it is. And I feel like their sapphic vampires now are more of a common thing, but Carmilla really was trailblazer when it comes to that. It said, you know, Dracula took some inspiration from Carmilla, and I think it's just really cool to experience something so old and so influential in all the genre. And if you like this type of creature, if you like vampires, you probably want to see kind of where it came from. I feel like more people probably read Dracula and familiar with the story, whereas Carmilla, I feel like now is getting her time in the sun, but for a while, or in the darkness, but for a while she definitely was passed over for Dracula, and I don't think that's right. So let's give Carmilla her flowers. And then I wanted to look another book, which is maybe not a classic, but it is a bit older and definitely really influential and plays a lot with the genre, which is Fledgling by Octavia E. Butler. So there were things I liked about this book, things I didn't like, but I think it did a lot of interesting things. So I would still pick it up yourself and figure out if this is something for you. So in Fledgling, we follow this girl who wakes up in a cave, blind and super weak and with no memories, and she stumbles out, and then we try to figure out what happened to her, what got her to where she was. But the twist is that she looks like a 10-year-old girl, whereas her inner monologue does not read like a 10-year-old. She then enters quite a disturbing relationship with humans, considering her perceived age, and it's a really, really interesting deconstruction of the trope, you know, like old vampire, young human, and kind of age and consent issues there. I think that was a really, really interesting part of this book. It was really rich in lore as well, so that was really interesting to learn. There are things that definitely makes you really uncomfortable and icky. I think it's meant to make you uncomfortable and feel icky, but doesn't mean you necessarily have to like think it was like enjoyable to read the book just because you're meant to feel uncomfortable. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I'm saying like I didn't particularly enjoy reading this book. I don't think I was meant to be like, yay, this relationship's great. I was like, oh my god. But it's definitely really, really interesting addition to the genre, and it talks again about interesting issues and things of the genre in a very unique way, whereas normally it's really romanticized. But this one is a very like fierce, gross look at it, if that makes sense. But the vampires were interesting, and writing is amazing because it's Octavia E. Butler, and I think it's definitely worth trying out and seeing what you think. Then I actually have another horror, which is House of Hunger by Alexis Henderson. So this is a sapphic book as well, and it's definitely more interesting and unique look at vampires. They're not quite straightforward. This one's more like, is it even a vampire? But it's definitely got to do with blood and that kind of thing. So I thought, let me put it on this list because I feel like it's really underrated. So in this one, we follow a woman who desperately wants a better life and needs money. So she decides to sign up to be this thing called a blood maiden, which is where you go to really rich people's houses and there's some bloodletting. But it just turns so obsessive and torturous and disturbing, and it's just really like a look on the underbelly of the privileged and the rich, and it really takes the concepts of the rich kind of leeching and bloodletting and feeding of the poor really literally. It's really interesting as a metaphor. It's super interesting as a sapphic romance. I loved it. It's really short but like packs a real punch, and yeah, I feel like it's not talked about enough. It's really really good, really interesting, really disturbing. If you don't like the sight of blood or thinking about blood, I mean, why would you then be a fan of vampires? That's my question. But this one like really makes you feel uncomfortable and makes you like sit down and think about it. Yeah, and I think sapphic vampire like things are iconic, so I just wanted to add it to this list. Then we're following with another horror. I don't know, I keep saying like, oh, this one's a horror, surprise. It's because I have some romances later, so I just want to like distinguish them. But this is a horror, but also kind of a little bit a comedy, as is all that Grady Hendrix writes. But this one is called The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, like I said, by Grady Hendrix. So this one is set in suburbia, and we follow a book club that hunt down a vampire. And I think the vampire in this one was absolutely fascinating. The way the physiology worked and what it did to the victims and stuff like that. I thought it was all really unique, really graphic, and really cool. But I think the biggest part of this was the book club and the woman in it. This was really an ode to motherhood, which is something that the author even says in his kind of author's note, that it's dedicated to his mother, and it's like about motherhood. And I did not think I would find this story as profound as I did. I think it really had an impact, and I loved reading it. I thought it was tense, funny, scary, had a lot to say, and really well written. And it just comes from such an unexpected place, I think, because it's just a bunch of housewives slaying vampires. It sounds like you think it would from that description, which is bloody amazing. Then we have In the Ravenous Dark by A.M. Strickland. So this one is, I think, like a YA horror maybe, but it's also mostly fantasy and there's romance in it. So we're slowly out of our horror trenches but into fantasy now. But in this one, it's set in like Roman inspired times kind of thing. So we follow a blood mage who gets bonded to this ghost spirit, and she starts a rebellion. And like I said, it's like a Roman inspired, and it's about polyamorous relationship, which I really enjoyed. And I think overall all the characters were done really well. I think the viciousness and the viscerality of the world was executed super well, and I just really enjoyed it. It was really well written. I want to pick up more from the author, and yeah, I really enjoyed the relationship, and the lore was cool, and it was like a different take on it. Then we have Silver Under Nightfall, which is another polyamorous vampire story. There's just something about queerness and polyamory that just speaks so much to, I think, vampires, especially when they're not like these super bloodthirsty creatures but still have some humanity or at least attraction there. I think it's just like such a popular way to explore those themes, and kind of, you know, depravity and that kind of thing, or what society deems as depravity but really is just alternative ways of love and stuff like that. I think that's really cool. So in this story, we follow a vampire hunter who teams up with a vampire king and his fiance to solve a crime. And I think the world was super interesting because there were like courts of vampires, and different vampires had different skill sets and weaknesses and powers, and then then there was also like bloodlust, and that was really interesting, and having the main character actually be a vampire hunter but then having to work with vampires. I really enjoyed that. I think the sequel's coming out soon, so I really want to pick it up. But overall, I was like really pleasantly surprised how much I liked the book. And again, the relationship I felt really, really just sang. It was done so well. Those two really good for also Rex if you like polyamorous books. Both really well executed. And the final two I would class as romantasy. And I feel like vampires are very popular in that subgenre, so I couldn't just leave you without talking about any of them. So the first one is The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. So this is duology that I read recently. So it's actually duology that will also have companion books in it. So I think there'll be like 6 books or something, each duology following a different couple. But in this one, we follow a human girl who, when she was a child, her whole family was killed and she got rescued by the vampire king and raised as his own daughter. She's lived in the vampire court her whole life, but she's always lived in fear because the vampires, they have bloodlust, they're really dangerous, prickly, volatile, and they feel a little bit like a cross between fae and vampires. They have wings, they have magic, but they also feed off of blood. I thought that was a really interesting, different take on the vampire to kind of combine it with the usual fae lore. And then the main character also participates in this tournament to the death to win the favor of the goddess of the vampires. So the world was super fascinating. I loved how it had like this vampire-centric world with like human pockets in it and how the two interacted. The magic system was interesting. And of course, the relationship was really good, really compelling. I thought it was pretty healthy. Well, as far as romantic relationships go, at least it was pretty decent. There was some good communication. There was sparks. There was chemistry. It's spicy. The spice was giving. Everything about this was just enjoyable. I had a really good time. I read book 1 and 2 super quickly. I'm definitely going to continue with this series. I think it was really well written. I think it's either self-published or indie published. I think self-published though. And I was really, really, really impressed by the offer. A really great job, and I had a great time. So I would recommend this if you're in need of romantasy and vampires are your chosen poison. I can also say the same thing about The Marionettes by Katie Wismer. So another self-published book. I have this wonderful hardback edition because I got it as a gift from a friend. I really enjoyed this series. So I think this series, there's 4 or 5 books and it's actually just completed. So now it's a completed series. But in this one, we follow a girl called Valerie who wants to become like a vampire bodyguard. So she's a powerful witch and she's in this witch academy where they train witches to become bodyguards for the vampires who are the ruling class. And then Valerie forges a connection with the vampire prince who she's meant to guard. I really enjoyed this. Later you have other creatures like werewolves, and overall the relationship super compelling. I'm yet to read the last book, so I need to figure out so I need to read the last book, but book 1 and 2 were so incredibly good. Especially book 2 gets really spicy. Book 1 not really, so if you don't like spice you could read this one, but book 2 and 3 and 4 I assume will not might be a little bit too spicy for you. I really love the friendships in here. Valerie has some witch friends as well. I really like the relationship. I thought that was done really well, and overall really, really solid vampire story that I really enjoyed. Again, it's really well written and it's self-published, so I think there's nothing in romantasy like self-published works. They just hit different, so go check it out. All right, well, those are all the vampire books I wanted to share. I do have more coming up in following months that are coming in, like Bride by Ailey Hazelwood. I really want to read Once Upon a Broken Heart, which I didn't know apparently has vampires. I am so excited for Tempest of Tea. I really hope I love it. And I'm just always on the lookout for more vampire books. So please give me any recommendations that you have that you think are amazing vampire books. I especially really would love to hear about vampires that are like really unique, non-traditional type of vampire, because I feel like a lot of vampire books, of course it's quite a standard type of vampire, but now there's stories with like, you know, vampires leeching off touching people and leeching off their energy, or like like different interesting takes on vampires. I would love to hear some of those recs. I tried like googling for some recs, but I feel like it's always best when someone directly recommends it to you. So please share any recommendations with me. Let me know, have you read any of these? Will you pick up any of these? I would love to hear. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, if you could give it a like, comment, and subscribe, I really appreciate it. It really helps me out. But that's it from me, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!